things. So pay no mind to this. We'll talk about this activity later. But this activity is meant to show that voluntary trade creates wealth always. And the general idea here is, folks, the general idea is that the only reason people trade is because they end up better off. If they did not end up better off, why would they make that trade, right? There's some trades that I hate having to make, right? I hate having to pay my mortgage. I hate having to buy, spend money on food, but I'm better off for spending money on those things, right? Any trade that you make, whether it's item for item or dollars for item, you make that trade because you end up better off. And the only reason that trade happens is because the other person, they end up better off, right? When I buy a burger from McDonald's, I'm doing that because I think that I'm going to be better off, right? They take my money because they value the money more than the burger, right? It's kind of amazing how trade works, in that the thing that we're trading for we think is more valuable than what we're giving away, and the other person, they think the exact same thing, okay? Gas is another one of those that you hate having to spend money on, yeah. Okay. So how can we make sure that we're creating wealth, right? If we're going to have free trade, how can we make sure that trade is creating wealth, right? How can we make sure that people are only trading when they're okay with it, right? Well, if that's going to happen, people have to have property rights, okay? And no, Homer, we don't mean, owning people, right? Or, in any other scenario where, sadly, slavery still exists, right? That's not creating wealth. We could get into a whole scenario as to how, a whole explanation as to how slavery made the United States poorer and how we're worse off for it and how we're not wealthier for it, as many people like to say. The truth is it hurt everybody, regardless of what the color of your skin is. Absolutely it hurt more, a certain class and a certain race of people more than it hurt others. But everybody in America is poorer for having that tainted, our history. In any case, you have to have property rights, and we're going to get into property rights later, but this is the idea that you own what's yours, what's rightfully yours, right? And that no one can sell it on your behalf. No one can sell it without you being okay with it. No one can use it without you being okay with it. Your stuff is yours, right? That's very important, because if I don't own the burger that I'm selling somebody, if I don't have property rights to it, then it could be that someone else thinks that it's worth it for me to get rid of my burger and for me to get something else for it, when I may not like that, right? And that would not create wealth, because I would get something that I value less, right? Voluntary exchange is also important. You cannot be forced to do something. You cannot, there cannot be fraud, and contracts have to be enforced, right? So let's talk about force first. The whole reason trade creates wealth is because it gets the resources into the hands of the people that value them the most, right? That trading activity that I'm going to show a video of does a great job of showing this. We take things people give the resource to someone that values it more than they do, and they get a resource from somebody who values it less than they do, okay? And it's also important that there's not fraud, right? It is true that, in free trade, yeah, there's going to be people that try to scam others. The good news is that being fraudulent is a very, very bad way of keeping customers. If you're a fraudulent seller, people probably aren't going to sell with you very often. You see this all the time, right? There's reviews online, right? People want to have good reviews. You'll get a package in the mail, and on it it'll say, please leave us a good review. And sadly, I don't. If they good service, I guess I should do that. But yeah, I guess the captions aren't on. I don't think I have them up. Let me fix that real quick. Thank you for reminding me. I appreciate it. Let me pop out the window. There we go. And then I have to... Okay, it's already off to the races. Cool. I feel like the closed captions have gotten easier and easier to set up for whatever reason. I don't know. Streamlabs is just deciding that today's going to be my day. It's important there's not fraud, right? Because I'm going to be wary to buy something from someone if I think that there's a chance that I may get defrauded. So that's why reputation is important, right? That's an important aspect. But more importantly, fraud has to be punishable, right? I have to know that there's an incentive for people not to be fraudulent. I think even without government, there's an incentive for people to not be fraudulent. And that's just because the market will say, okay, you know, think about it yourself. If you make a trade with someone who's fraudulent, not only are you not going to use them, you're probably also going to be very spiteful, and you're going to make it so no one else wants to shop with them either. Okay, and it's important that contracts are enforced. For if I didn't, you know, if I make a contract with somebody, if I give them something today and they're supposed to give me $100 in the future, if I think there's a, you know, if I for some reason think that this contract isn't going to be fulfilled, then I'm not going to make that contract. But the thing is, I think, you know, if I knew that it's going to be fulfilled, then it creates wealth, right? Because we're able to trade. I value getting the $100 in the future. They value the item they're getting now. So it's important that these contracts are enforced, right? You cannot, this is why the government serves an important purpose here in making sure these contracts are enforced, right? This is why we have courts, because we need to know that if something in the contract doesn't go as we agreed for it, then that person can still be made to pay, okay? So we are going to watch this video real quick, and I'm going to annotate it as we go, but we are going to watch the garage sale. Those of you that are Office fans, you've probably seen this video before. Very good. I'm going to change the lecture here. I'm going to put on my headset so I can hear.
Hey, Oscar, big Will and Grace fan, huh?
No. Everybody
I just realized there's a creeper in the background. Hold up, guys. Hold up.
Dunder Mifflin.
Hold up. I'm setting up an activity that we're going to watch. I'm just going to log out of the game for now. We'll come back to this. Oh, here. Did Dwight force her to make this trade? No. Was he fraudulent? No. I mean, it is a thumbtack, right? And, you know, he was respecting her property rights. He wasn't taking it until they made the trade. So all the qualities for us to achieve wealth creation are being met here, okay? So what's happening? She values the thumbtack more than she values the candle. He values the candle more than she values the thumbtack. And the job that Dwight's doing here, that he's getting rewarded for as he gets to bigger and bigger items, we'll talk about after this. Both parties weren't happy. They could not come to an agreement. And because of that, the trade didn't happen. Therefore, the people that valued it the most got to keep it, right? In all of these trades, Dwight wasn't pulling a gun on anyone. They were all trading because they wanted the item that he had more than, you know, they wanted the item themselves, okay? And he wanted the item, very same situation, he wanted the item they had more, right? So again, resources being given to those that value them the most. Wealth increasing. We like to think that, or we assume that trade's a zero-sum game, and that's not true, right? It's not that one person loses and another person wins. It's a positive sum. You know, Dwight's job here, he's a middleman. And I want you to remember that word, because we're going to get to it here in a second. But I just want to hit some things up as we get through this. The Miracle Beans. Was Jim being fraudulent? No, I mean, didn't he tell Dwight they're probably worthless? Dwight did it anyways, right? There are all sorts of things that are examples of people believing in something supernatural that they spend money on that, in at least some person's opinion, are a waste of money. Shungite, stones, anything regarding your sign. Does that mean that we should have the government come in and make laws? No, I mean, if these people think that that's valuable to them, and if they find value in it, then they should be able to make their own decisions, right? It's not fraudulent. You could make an argument for the Shungite, but not this, at least. Not this Miracle Legumes example, because they said it's probably worthless, right? And then, of course, preventing fraud. I actually found this. I found this website here for kosher certification. Because I thought a lot of certifications, or licenses, I should say, are given out by the government. Okay, the FDA, they certify meat and food and all sorts of other things. Okay, but this is one example of a certification that is given out by a private entity. See, kosher certification are for people of certain religions or people that observe certain things religiously. They aren't allowed to have certain things in their food, and kosher certification demonstrates that you don't have those things in your product. Okay, it's sometimes not just food. I think it's also some other product. I think you can't use certain animals in general. Not too sure though. But for this is all done private, so we don't necessarily have to have the government do this, right? There are private companies that can, But I don't know, just something I thought was cool, right? A lot of the times we think the government has to do this, but this is a great example of something that we don't have to have government do necessarily. We just traditionally have it done that way. Yeah, and then of course, this came into my mind because of course Ryan said it was, oh yeah, that's all cool, it's kosher. He didn't get it kosher certified, so you know, a company like this, they could probably take him to court, right? Sue him. So let's go ahead and go back to our slides. If I can find it here. Here we are. Okay. Great example of how trade creates wealth, right? You know, you can see Dwight getting better and better items. You can see people getting better and better items, right? Everyone in the office was being made better off because of Dwight, okay? So then, we're getting into number 5 here. Allow me to change the topic to lecture 5. To transaction costs. Uh-oh. There we are. So let's talk about transaction costs. Transaction costs are things that prevent you from trading, right? So if trade creates wealth and transaction costs prevent you from trading, what does that tell us? Transaction costs reduce wealth, or they make it so less wealth is created, right? Now, there can be different kinds of transaction costs. They can be physical, they can be informational, they can be entirely fictional. What that means here in a second. So physical obstacles are literal obstacles that prevent you from trading, right? Like distance. You know, I have to go to the store to trade, right? You know, it'd be much cheaper to trade if Walmart was in my home, or maybe if I lived in Walmart. Okay, it'd be much cheaper to trade if you know, all the countries weren't separated by these huge oceans, right? If the world weren't so big, there wouldn't be so many transaction costs. Probably wouldn't be as much wealth because there wouldn't be anywhere near as many people, though. So, physical obstacles are the first type of transaction costs, and they're natural. I mean, we've done things to alleviate them, right? We've come up with all sorts of these amazing ways to trade goods over long distances, right? We come up with things like trains and all sorts of different vehicles, things that can fly, things that can go over water, right? We've done all sorts of things to try to alleviate the costs that come with physical obstacles, okay? And then there's just a lack of information, an informational barrier that can be a transaction cost, right? Let's say I want to buy something, but I have no clue who has it. What do I do? Well, I can't buy it, right? I don't get to make that trade. Or maybe I want to make that trade, but I have to go and search out who has the item that I want. Okay? And we've seen this today become really easy, right? We have things like Amazon Marketplace. We have things like eBay, where I can just go into a search bar, type it in, and the item is right there, right? That has lowered dramatically transaction costs when it comes to a lack of information. Before we had those online stores, we had retail stores. Retail stores, they give information, right? I know that if I go there, I can find shampoo. I can find someone that sells shampoo. I can find some L'Oreal in there, right? And I can buy it from them, right? I guess I'm buying it from Walmart, but of course Walmart buys it from the distributor who buys it from L'Oreal. In any case, I have the information that I need. There's my shampoo. Found it. Okay? And then we have the last barrier. You see, some barriers are fictional. They're created out of thin air. There's not an obstacle. It's not that people don't have the information. It's the pure fact that for whatever reason, the government is preventing people from trading. Okay, this could be a tax, right? This could be a tariff. A tariff is a tax on imports. These could be quotas. The government says, hey, you can only we're only going to let in this much of steel from the outside of the country. Everything else has to be made within the country. There can be licensing requirements, right? If I want to be a hairstylist, I have to go and get a license. If I want to be a teacher, hey-oh, I got to be a license, right? And there's all sorts of other regulations, right? So we know that, you know, me having to travel a long distance to go get something is a cost, and that reduces wealth. We know that a lack of information, not knowing who has what I want, or not knowing who wants what I have, that is a transaction cost and reduces wealth. And political obstacles. They make it harder to trade with others, or more costly, right? If you just put a tax on something, more costly to trade with others, and that therefore reduces wealth, right? So getting back to middlemen, what Dwight was doing, you know, people always talk about, oh, you just got to cut out the middleman. Sell it directly to me. Cut out the middleman. And that's true. I mean, it does make it cheaper. But it's not that we've cut out the middleman. It's just that the middleman has evolved, right? When we look at sellers online, right? If you look at Amazon Marketplace, that's an example of how a middleman has evolved, right? It's gone from a middleman having to buy it, ship it to the retail store, and then you come in and buy it from the retail store. Now the middleman is just online information, right? You type in your item, and then Amazon says, hey, this person sells it, or hey, we sell it, right? Or on Craigslist, eBay, you type in your item, hey, this person's selling this. Oh, cool, right? So they don't increase costs. You might think, oh, well, you know, there's all this overhead, right? You know, you have to have the retail store, you have to have the online server. That doesn't increase costs. If it increased costs, they wouldn't exist, right? They wouldn't be profitable. But we know that because they exist, they're profitable. And because they're profitable, they increase wealth, meaning they decrease costs. They make it easier for you to find what you want. So, how should we trade then? How should we trade? Well, we should trade not based on what we're best at. Is that weird? Is that weird to say? We shouldn't do what we're best at. Instead, you should do, we have a comparative advantage in, and we're going to talk about that here in a minute. So, absolute advantage is what you're best at, right? Absolute advantage is what you're best at. Comparative advantage is what you have the lowest opportunity cost in. Okay? And we'll demonstrate why that is here in a minute. Okay? We'll demonstrate why that is here in a minute. Actually, this wasn't recorded in the lecture. This was from yesterday. Just while it's on the top of my, tip of my tongue, I suppose. No, that's when I can't remember something. What's on the top of my mind? Sure, I don't know what the phrase is. Anyways, there's this idea. I just realized the video's over. I can take these off. Good example of this is a lawyer versus a secretary. Which one of them should do the typing? Even if the lawyer is a better typer, should the lawyer be the one doing the typing? There's all sorts of better things the lawyer could be doing. Instead, it's much better for the secretary, the one with a comparative advantage in typing, to do all of that typing and office work and let the lawyer focus on preparing cases. Okay? So, the law of comparative advantage states this. It states that individuals are better off specializing in the production of one good and trading for what they do not make. Individuals should specialize and produce what they have a comparative advantage in. And this includes you, right? Think about your own home. Do you make everything at home? Absolutely not. I hope not, right? That would take up all your time. Instead, here's what I do. Here's what I do to make everything at home. I go to work for 8 hours a day. I teach people about economics. I come home. I use the money that I get to buy whatever I need. Okay, so you should do what you can to make it so that when you go out and you work, you can come back and buy whatever you need, hopefully more. Okay? So, Mr. Weaver, wouldn't it be much cheaper if you made everything at home? Well, imagine, shoot, I'm wearing these khaki pants right now. Dude, I have no clue how to make these. And let's say I learned how to make these. There is no hope of me ever being able to make these, a pair of pants, that will take me less than a day. And that's just to make a pair of pants. Instead, I can go to work, make enough money, come home, buy a pair of pants, and then have way more money left over, right? I can, essentially, I can make more pairs of pants by going to work, coming home, and using all the money that I got from work to buy pairs of pants. I'd be able to get way more pairs of pants than trying to make these pants at home. If anything, I'd get a pair of Daisy Dukes at the end of the day. I wouldn't be able to get anywhere near enough of a pair of pants done. Okay? Let's look at this example. There's two countries here. These countries may look familiar to some people from a game called World of Warcraft. Okay? Now, Stormwind and Ironforge, they can both make axes and swords. They can both make axes and swords. Both of them can. Okay? But they can make different amounts. You see, if Stormwind, if they put an hour into making axes, they can make 6 axes. Pretty nice. If Ironforge puts an hour into making axes, they can make 3. Okay. Does that mean that Stormwind should make axes? Well, let's find out. Stormwind can also make 4 swords in an hour, whereas Ironforge can only make 1 sword in an hour. So what we need to do here is find the opportunity cost that it takes for each of these to make what we want. Because if we're supposed to trade based on comparative advantage, and comparative advantage is the ability to make something at a lower opportunity cost, we need to find that. Well, here's how we do this. We need to find out that for every axe, how much a sword costs. How many swords are we giving up? And for every sword we make, how many axes is that city giving up? Well, we do this, we just take, in order to find how many axes we're giving up, whenever we make a sword, we just take 4 swords over 6 axes. Simplifies down to 2/3, right? So we get something like this. So 1A, or 1 axe, is equivalent to us making 2/3 of a sword. The resources required to make an axe requires 2/3 of a sword. And you could just do the reciprocal then, is 1 sword is the same amount of materials to make 1.5 axes. Over here we can see that 1 axe for Ironforge is 1/3 of a sword, and for the swords, the materials for 1 sword is equivalent to the materials for 3 axes. Okay. Now again, what are we supposed to trade to? Are we supposed to trade to who can make the most? Stormwind can make 6 axes an hour, and an Ironforge can make 3? No. You see, we trade based on comparative advantage, right? And we'll see why that is here in a minute. We trade based on this number here. We trade on the lower cost, right? Sorry, not the lower cost, the lower opportunity cost. Okay. So what does this end up meaning? Well, let's say that Stormwind, they spend an hour making swords. Okay? They spend an hour making swords. And they're willing to trade 1 sword away to get 2 axes. Why is that? Well, if they trade all 4 of those swords away, they get 8 axes. Dude, that's awesome, right? Because instead of making these 4 swords on their own, they could only make 6 axes. But if they make 4 swords and then trade them all away, they can get 8 axes, right? Now, would Ironforge be okay with this? Would they be okay with 1 sword for 2 axes? Well, let's see here. If we're to look at this here, 1 axe is normally 1/3 of a sword. Which means if they want to take the resources of 3 axes and make a sword, they have to give up 3 axes. But Stormwind's saying, hey, how about you just give us 2 axes and we'll give you a sword? So they don't have to, they can essentially make 2 axes, or they could even make 3 axes, trade 2 of them away and have a sword, whereas before, without trading, they'd have to make all 3 axes and they'd have no swords, okay? They'd have to sacrifice those 3 axes and then they'd have a sword, okay? So both of them get to benefit from trading. That's awesome, okay? They're able to increase their wealth by trading with one another. Anywho, that's all